and probably the leading face in the world, I'm guessing, on marijuana. And we're so happy to have him here this morning. So, Kevin, I'm going to let you take it away and help us understand how do we say that with some of these really controversial marijuana questions and issues are brought to our attention. So thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Can you hear me okay like this? Just want to make sure my audio is working. Great, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Tony, and thanks to Drug Free Action Alliance, who's proudly our SAM affiliate in Ohio. Just for some background, SAM is a 501c3 nonprofit. We do education around marijuana issues. Advisory board spans most major medical association representatives, as well as other people like civil rights leaders, Judge Arthur Burnett, Patrick Kennedy, the former congressman, David Frum, the conservative commentator, and others. We also have a political arm, SAM Action, that focuses as a separate nonprofit organization. It's a 501c4, which focuses more on the political side. But really today, with just representing SAM, I think it's important that we're having these kinds of discussions, because I think too often we get so in the details about what study said this or what study said that or what the data's saying, which is absolutely, we have to base everything on what we're saying on science. However, we sort of forget that the vast majority of Americans don't spend their time talking or thinking about marijuana policy. And so we sort of talk to them as if they are preventionists or treatment folks or law enforcement in the field, when in reality their own reality of marijuana is probably benign. It's probably they knew some people that smoked in college and they're all fine now, or maybe they themselves did. Their reality is probably that, they see alcohol as having a horrible, destructive influence on society, and they don't really see a lot about pot. So what's the big deal? And maybe we can make some tax revenue and build some schools. That's really where most reasonable average Americans are now turning, which is why we sort of are seeing this change. So we need to be able to talk about this, with our neighbors at barbecues, in our church groups. In a way that I think is more where people are coming from, right? Meeting people where they're at. That's really important, because if we just get out there and throw out the IQ study, throw out the study on driving, it's easily refuted by people's own experiences, right? They transfer their own experiences. And we have to remember, and are you guys gonna, I think you guys are gonna switch the slides, so if you could just go to the next slide. Right. We have to remember where a lot of people are remembering marijuana from their perspective, and where a lot of people are remembering it are essentially this sort of reefer madness talk. And by the way, just as an aside, I mean, and this kind of just proves my point that unfortunately the truth isn't always important in these debates, which is really a shame. Reefer Madness, the movie Reefer Madness, was actually a church film that was shown to a very limited number of people. It was never adopted by the government. It was not a government prevention campaign. And only later, about 30 or 40 years later, was it revived by the legalization crowd in the 60s and 70s to talk about basically how ridiculous anything negative about marijuana was. And they used Reefer Madness as an example of that. Of course, today, a lot of Americans think it was a government film, and we're not going to change that. I mean, we can't, go around and say, no, it really wasn't a government film. It was a church film, and it's really not our. You have to understand that we're not exaggerating. We're not going to be able to change that. We have to realize this is where people are coming from, and you can see some of the, hilarious things on here. Does marijuana, for some people cause a kind of insanity? Well, absolutely. I mean, does it cause a kind of, psychosis and schizophrenia? No doubt about it. Now the recent science is so much clearer on that. But, that doesn't really matter. What people are coming from is that it's, the government has propagandized this for 70 years, and it's time to make a change. And this is the reality we have to understand and start facing. So we were not doing ourselves, and frankly, the groups in the 30s, as well-intentioned as they were, they're not doing us any favors by talking about marijuana this way. And similarly today, in the 2010s, we're not doing ourselves any favors when we talk about it like this either, because for the vast majority of people, certainly the people that are going to be alive in the next 10 to 15 years and are going to be sort of making the decision on this, this isn't gonna, it's not gonna work anymore. Next slide. So again, yeah, again, so the messaging, you can go to the next slide. It's basically what I said. It's emotional, you know, et cetera. And so we've had a huge change in the number of, for example, the baby boomers, right? My parents' generation, right about my parents' generation, who favor legalization. And remember, we had a, you know, they once did favor legalization in the late 1970s. That was the last time we were very close to legalizing marijuana in this country. You know, there was a whole thing about cocaine not being a big deal, about marijuana not being a big deal. Of course, that was prior to the crack epidemic. Why did the reduction happen between 1978 and 1990? You know, that's a really good question. I think there are a number of reasons. I think parent groups were one big reason. They united, really mainly mothers. I mean, yes, there were definitely fathers involved, but mainly mothers who back then the workforce did not look like what it did today. Staying at home was much more common occurrence. And you know, there was a very united front there, and I have to say there were other socioeconomic factors going on as well. There was a conservative revolution in the 1980s that really deplored drugs and looked down on it. There was a really a backlash to the, you might say, excesses of the 60s and 70s in terms of the sort of liberal mindset. There was a backlash to that. There was also something called crack cocaine that had never been around before, and that was scaring for the right reasons. I think a lot of people, this was a new smokable form of powder cocaine. It changed the face of drug abuse in this country, and that was very scary. And I frankly think marijuana probably suffered from a sort of pairing problem with crack because it was sort of lumped in with drugs. There were a lot of reasons why there was a reduction. And then gradually, since the 1990s, this age group has changed, and they now, about half of them favor legalization, which represents about half, you know, that's sort of the case that about half the country represents it. And so that's a big change, and the change really occurred only over the last 12 or 13 years. Have to be very aware of how rapid that has happened. You know, remember, we went from 1992, it was completely still a faux pas to admit to marijuana use. You had to pry it out of Bill Clinton, and he only framed it in a way that, you know, when I was in England, I tried it a time or two. I didn't inhale, I didn't like it, and I never did it again. So his thing was he didn't even take it in, and he never did it more than once. That was sort of acceptable, but then look at how quickly norms changed. And you can't say this is a Democrat versus Republican thing, because here's Democratic candidate, about to be candidate for president, Barack Obama. He said, you know, look, when I was a kid, I inhaled frequently. That was the point, right? Very straightforward. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? The Republican sort of maverick. You know, marijuana is not a drug; it's a leaf, right? And so, you know, what a difference from the 90s to the late 2000s. And this really precipitated a change in public opinion that was about to happen with regards to marijuana. So there's been a huge public messaging campaign. I mean, obviously, when people say, well, why has there been this change? When did it get acceptable? You know, absolutely hundreds of millions of dollars probably have been poured into messaging, right, only. And a couple of, you know, a handful of groups have been really in charge of that. And they've been actually very brilliant. The marijuana groups have taken the medical argument and basically turned the average marijuana user in people's minds, went from the 30-year-old stoner with no job and no future to the 80-year-old grandmother with debilitating pain or cancer. And that very much helped their cause, because nobody was going to be against, right, helping the grandma. Nobody wanted to look like they were denying grandma anything she needed to help her. And so they were able to confuse the issue of medical and legalization. Frankly, if I could rewind time, I think our field should have embraced the non-smoked medical components of marijuana a lot sooner. I mean, I think we did, in terms of saying, look, there's Marinol, you know, stop your complaining. We have a portion. It's called Marinol. But we could have done more. I think if the federal government and others had funded more research there, we might have 10 marijuana-based medications today that rapidly came on board in the 90s, where we could have separated the issue of medical and legalization. We tried to separate it with our own messaging, but when we're against $200 million, good luck to us. Also, preventionists and treatment practitioners and law enforcement and scientists, okay, those four vital groups in our coalition, none of us of those four groups, none of them are, PR mavens, right? None of them are communications experts. None of them were strategizing about this. And there were a couple of anti-drug groups trying to strategize, but badly outfunded and outmessaged because of that. And we can't, unfortunately, go back in time. So today, we live with the reality that 80% of Americans agree with medical marijuana. And they lump it together, most of them, with recreational. And the Drug Policy Alliance, extremely strategic in what they were doing, because they were opening the tent to public health folks, to the folks that we were not always opening the tent for, in the very beginning. Remember, in our field, in prevention and law enforcement, it was not acceptable in the late 1980s to laud the wonders of treatment. Remember that. I mean, we got to be very clear. We were not always fans of treatment, and so we did not embrace the public health treatment community as fast as we should have. We did eventually, but it allowed groups like Drug Policy Alliance and others to get into that middle, talk about how they have a big tent, and how, look, listen, if you believe in methadone, if you believe in needle exchange, if you believe in naloxone, if you believe in giving people a second chance, if you believe in not giving someone a 10-year mandatory minimum because they're black and they smoke crack, then you're with us. And that's what the Drug Policy Alliance did, and they built a very formidable coalition. And here we are in 2015, sort of dealing with that, right, the remnants of that. And I think that is very difficult for us to overcome. I think we can do it, and I'm not here to be a Debbie Downer and to say how horrible everything is, but I think that we have to face the reality of where we are, and our messaging has to correspond to that. So what are their messages? As I said, the medical part, they polled, when they were trying to figure out the kind of what worked, they polled and found out that a couple of things worked. One, alcohol is safer than marijuana. Okay, they were able to poll that, and they found that people thought that, and they found that the argument of, well, alcohol is safer or at least just as dangerous, right? Not more dangerous, but maybe just as dangerous as pot. Why is it illegal and marijuana is illegal? Okay, that polled very well. The issue of taxes polled very well. The issue of medical polled very well, and then to some extent the issue of challenging the addictiveness and also challenging the fact they're saying that drug arrests are all for pot. They were able to skew the message, and of course not tell us that, well, maybe half the drug arrests are for pot, but less than 1% of those in jail or prison are for pot. But now of course it's really interesting. They say most of the people are arrested aren't kingpins. Well, that's true, because how many kingpins can you have? I mean, you can't have 700,000 kingpins. It doesn't make sense. But again, people don't think beyond the 1 second, and so these have had a very, very, very positive impact from their perspective. They changed their messengers. I mean, the reality is the look of this was the hippie in the 70s that really did not have a political. I mean, even the Democrats would sort of in public separate themselves from that. They changed from that to reasonable looking executives, former Microsoft guys. This Jamin Shively, I don't know how well he's doing now. I think he thought he would make more money by now than he has, but he is a former Microsoft guy. There are a number of private equity guys out there, and these people allow the governor of Colorado to say things like what he's been saying lately, which is, well, I used to be a skeptic, but things seem to be going okay now, that kind of thing. Well, because these guys give him cover, and I'm going to be sitting on a panel opening remarks with the governor tomorrow in Denver for the biannual Summit of the Americas, and I worry about what he's going to say, frankly, because he used to be great on our issue, and he used to be great on this, but now now that the government kind of owns this issue in Colorado, I think they feel like they have to own it, and then people like Jamin Shively and others give them cover. And so they've really been smart to change their messengers. Next slide. So here, let's go. We're going to go through some of the things that they're saying. Clearly, this is the one that polls the best, right? Alcohol versus pot. And alcohol is safer than marijuana. Shouldn't we just legalize it? So if we think about this question, there are two ways that I think we can approach kind of where this is and what we would do. The first thing is to argue, no, 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 alcohol is not, marijuana isn't safer. And sorry, this slide I think should actually say marijuana is safer than alcohol. Okay, so we'll just pretend that it says that right now. Marijuana is safer than alcohol. Shouldn't we just legalize it? And so when people say marijuana is safer than alcohol, we can either say no, 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 it's actually a lot more dangerous, and here's why. And we could make a good argument. I mean, we could talk about the IQ studies. We could talk about what marijuana does to the lungs that alcohol does not do. We could talk about the issue of psychosis and schizophrenia, which is emerging with marijuana, that is not as strong with alcohol, we think. We can talk about those things. We can also talk, a lot of people just say plain and simply, listen, you can have a glass of wine for dinner. You're not doing it to get drunk. You're doing it for the taste and everything. And if you're smoking a joint, you're only doing it to get high. So one is about being intoxicated and one isn't. That's not the tack I usually take, frankly. I don't think we win when we start arguing the relative harms, because that they can turn that around so quickly and with some very poignant points and really some facts. They can say, well, wait a minute, alcohol, quintuples your risk of a car crash. Marijuana only doubles it. Alcohol quintuples your risk of a violent episode. Marijuana, we're not even sure if it causes violence. Alcohol, do you know somebody who's been, a raging alcoholic versus a raging pothead? So they can, that's not, I don't think we really, look, we can have a discussion about it, and doctors will have that discussion, and at the end of the day, probably conclude that actually, alcohol probably is slightly safer on a number of outcomes. But I don't think that's what we do. I think what we do is simply say, listen, alcohol is legal because it's been around in Western culture for over 5,000 years. Okay, it's been around. Everyone, I mean, it's like, we have used alcohol in Western culture forever. And we're sort of stuck with it whether we like it or not. And we're not going to argue if we should go back to prohibition. Remember, alcohol prohibition was taking a status quo of 5,000 years, changing it for 10 years, and then going back. That's not what we're doing with marijuana. Marijuana has been illegal in everyone's lifetime who's alive now, mainly. And so, that's not the same situation. And marijuana has not been in Western culture for 5,000 years, used by the majority of people, right? So we're not stuck with that. And do we think alcohol is going well? And people say, well, no, 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 that's why it's so bad. It causes car crashes and violence and all these horrible things. So no, it's terrible. And so I think then we can say, well, yeah, we don't want to make the same mistake twice. We don't want to do the same thing that didn't work out great the first time, and which we can't reverse anymore. We don't want to make the same mistake twice. And what I usually say is, for a young person, to tell them marijuana is safer. Sorry, to tell them that that marijuana is safer than alcohol. We're not going to say, that's kind of like telling that young person, the fourth floor, to jump out of the window of the fourth floor is safer than jumping out of the eighth floor. I mean, yes, it might actually be safer, but they're both bad decisions. And, we don't want to be repeating a bad decision. Of course, they'll say, oh, you want to go back to alcohol prohibition? No, we don't. We understand the limits of that. It's a cultural difference. And I think that's really where we stop, and we move on to our other arguments. I will say, once we start defending alcohol prohibition, I don't think that's a good tactic. And I know some people who I work closely with also do think that's a good tactic, because they talk about it, because they're right. During alcohol prohibition, it's true. Alcohol use went down. I mean, public health actually was increased. But it's universally regarded as a failure. And unless someone is going to embark on a 50-year PR campaign to bring back alcohol prohibition, or at least talk about how great it was, it's not an argument for us. So, anytime anyone from our field lauds alcohol prohibition in any way, the legalizers rightfully expose it. You should go on Twitter and see what they say. It's just not a winning argument to defend alcohol prohibition, but we don't have to defend marijuana prohibition, because we can talk about how different they are culturally, and I think that's a very important distinction. The war on drugs has been a failure. Why should we do it the same way? This is another one where I really wish our field would not take the bait. Okay, again, we can argue the merits of the war on drugs if we want. There are good things to say about the fact that, since the 1970s, drug use has fallen dramatically. Since the ramp up of supply reduction in the 1980s, which only happened after Ronald Reagan. Remember, Richard Nixon's war on drugs focused mainly on giving treatment, and it was methadone and things like that. Ronald Reagan's version was more supply side oriented, with interdiction and crop eradication and international relations. We can make an argument for either of them, and as they have, by the way, that actually what we are doing is so much better than if we were to legalize. Look at alcohol and tobacco. Look at how they're used so much more than legal drugs. Remember, alcohol is used by over 55% of Americans, tobacco even today by a quarter of Americans, drugs by about less than 10% of Americans. So you can make an argument that, hey, it actually does work. But I don't do that. Again, this is kind of something where I don't think we're going to win the PR battle using the term war on drugs. Even as early as Bill Clinton's drug czar Lee Brown, as well as his second drug czar, who was the highest decorated, youngest living four-star general at the time, Barry McCaffrey, abandoned that term war on drugs, and I think that's probably the right thing to do. Not because I want to abandon our efforts against drugs, but because the term doesn't get us any new friends, okay? And if you want to think about what we're trying to do here, folks, we are trying to get new friends, okay? Because if we don't get new friends in this issue, we lose in 10 years, okay? We need new friends, and new friends aren't coming to the, saying, oh my God, yes, the war on drugs has been a giant success. No, our old friends do that, and that's wonderful, and we all might do that too. But we need new friends, and we don't get new friends by calling it a war on drugs. What we need to do is admit that, yes, in many respects, listen, is anybody proud of the incarceration rate? I can probably count 3 people on my hand that might be proud of that today in America. I don't think most of us are. Is anyone proud of the fact that no matter how you slice it, minorities are arrested at higher proportions, marginalized populations are, than upper class folks? Is anybody proud of the fact that we treat 2 drugs that are the same thing with the exception of the way that they are used and the way they hit the brain in a way that is 100 times worse? Of course, in the Obama administration, we reduced it to 18 times worse, but it's nothing to write home about. I don't think we can defend that. And at the end of the day, when people see a heroin epidemic in their community right now, when people see OxyContin being handed out like candy, pushed by an industry who profits off of addiction, and yes, that is the pharmaceutical industry. At the end of the day, when people see that, how in the world are they going to be saying that we have a success? So rather than take the bait, and I'll leave taking the bait to other people, and maybe they'll be more successful than I've been. What I want to say is, we shouldn't do it the same way. Absolutely, we need a change. But the change we need is not legalization. The change we need is not turning one tragedy of a war on drugs in the ghettos of America to another tragedy of another legal industry profiting off of the poor. That's how I frame it. And when it's framed like that, I'll tell you, people's ears start opening up. Okay, people's eyes widen. They want to listen to you. They're open to hearing, well, what do you mean by another tragedy? And then you can talk about, I think, what the main message is, which is that this is about another big tobacco, another alcohol, another prescription drug pharmaceutical industry that's here to target the sort of poorest among us, that's here to target the youngest among us, the most vulnerable, for profit. Okay, when we frame it that way, we get new friends. When we don't, we lose. And so you know, we do want to say that, you know, when Patrick gets up there, you know, he says, which I agree with, you know, we're not proud of the war on drugs, the part that has, you know, enriched the private prison industry. We're not proud of the fact that, you know, our incarceration system does not resemble a therapeutic kind of system for people who are addicts. We're not proud of the fact that we end up imprisoning addicts as well as their girlfriends, their mothers, and their kids because they're somewhat involved in a drug transaction. Those things, we're not proud of the fact that we seize property from people when we don't have the proof often to do it. So what we do want to say is that we are proud of the fact, though, that we do have things that work. We do know treatment can work. We do know that giving people a second chance can work. We do know that giving them a job opportunity, re-entering them into society can work. Let's do that instead of go to either extreme. And the either extreme is either a war on drugs on one hand or legalization on the other. The way the legalizers are framing this is that they are the reasonable people. And they do look reasonable, by the way, when we keep harping about how wonderful it is, everything that we're doing, and nothing can be changed. So we have to change that narrative. Next slide. I talked about this already. Prohibition didn't work. How is marijuana any different? I don't think we, again, fall back on, well, actually it did, because it's true, by the way, the volume of alcohol fell. Cirrhosis of the liver was not an issue as it was for 10 years before that. A lot of things happened where, you know, you could say was positive, but we're not going to be making that case. I just don't think we win when we make that case. I think we simply say it is different, actually, because alcohol has been ingrained in our society, and you cannot prohibit something that at the time, you know, 60 to 70% of Americans indulge in regularly. You're not going to prevent that from happening. We're not there with pot, okay? When pot reaches a 50% critical mass of users every day or every week or every month in any kind of regular fashion, let's talk. But it's not there yet, and we want to prevent it to be there, prevent that from happening. And so it's a very different argument than alcohol prohibition. Another one that they love is this is inevitable. You know, it's kind of like they like to have it both ways, because on the one hand they say, well, you know, everybody knows this is happening, and God, Kevin, even the way you describe it, these big businesses, I mean, how are we going to defeat them? They're never going away. And then on the other hand, they sometimes say, well, it's not going to legalize itself, so we need everybody to work hard, and we need everybody to legalize it for, you know, help us legalize it. So they try and have it both ways, but in general, they are pushing this inevitability kind of argument. And, you know, what I would say again is that this is an activity that less than 10% of Americans do. And I think that when Americans wake up to the fact that this means a pot shop next to their kid's school, right? This means a pot shop in their community on Main Street. This means their employees get to come to work and you don't know if they were testing positive for pot because they used this morning or they used last week. This means that your bus driver may have marijuana in their system, and again, they smoked in the morning, wake and bake, every day, daily user, versus what maybe they smoked last week and it's not actually affecting them, but they still get into an accident. Well, who's to blame? When people start hearing this, and when these things start happening, folks, I don't think it's inevitable. So we may have legalization in a handful of more states. We may have it in many more states. I don't think the story is done, though. I don't think it's alcohol, because unlike alcohol, again, it doesn't have the cultural richness behind it to lift it with that foundation. The foundation upon legalization is so shaky because the promises are so shaky. You know, the new schools, the new roads, the new parks, where are those things? Why aren't they happening? The public health messaging, the treatment, the prevention, well, where are those things? Why aren't they happening in these states? They're not happening. And so when people kind of wake up to that, I feel like this is not going to be inevitable. So we need to push with our own field, because often in our own field, you know, folks are very cynical. We need to push that actually in the long run, this is not inevitable. They should not be on the wrong side of history. We should tax marijuana, right? So why should all the dealers, and this is what's often, you know, said is, hey, you know, drug dealers are making money. Why doesn't the city of Denver make money, right? That's what they said. Why doesn't my school get to make money? And instead of these, you know, these folks. And I think that I think that it's a very alluring argument. Now, of course, at the end of the day, we simply need to say, okay, well, what's going on with the taxes for alcohol and tobacco? Are you funding your treatment? Well, no. Are your streets fully paved and your schools fully funded? Well, no. Is everything that you want, is your state in a good position budget-wise because of alcohol and tobacco? No. So I think we need to remind people what other and gambling is another reminder, right? So we need to remind them. And let me tell you something. If Colorado thinks it's going to be making a lot of tax money and the legalizers are promising all this tax money, what happens if more places do legalize? Well, then that tax revenue shrivels. Atlantic City is a great example of this, folks. Atlantic City had a gambling is a gambling mecca, built on the fact that they were the only place around that could do it, and they thought it was great. Then all of a sudden, the surrounding states started to legalize gambling. What happened? Well, the profits got thinner for everybody, and Atlantic City is now bankrupt. Okay? So this idea that it's going to fund your city or town is really not based in reality. Drug dealers, by the way, aren't even the ones making the money from marijuana, because most of the marijuana is given away by friends, is grown by neighbors, is grown by friends, and is not sold by the Mexican mafia. So the vast majority of people making money off of marijuana are not foreign drug cartels. They are your neighbor's brother or your neighbor's kid. That's different, and so I think we need to emphasize that as well. So let's go to the next slide. Same thing. If marijuana were legal, the cartels and gangs would go away. Are we for cartels? Well, let's talk about this. The cartel, this is where we do need to sort of just tell them the facts. Listen, cartels and gang members make their money from human trafficking, from kidnapping, from cocaine, from heroin and methamphetamine, a very small minority from marijuana. The majority of the marijuana market now is in the United States. Why? Well, it's because of one big fact we haven't talked about yet. We grow much better pot than most of the world. So we have learned to crossbreed and have THC increase in huge proportions so that today's pot is not your Woodstock weed and is not your 1980s or 1990s weed. So the cartels and gangs are not part of this. And if you legalize marijuana, well, actually, we're now noticing maybe cartels are moving over to grow more heroin. Is that what we want? They're now going over to making more money from their other sources. And by the way, they're still growing marijuana. They're still trying to compete. But they're certainly not going away, and we can't imagine that they will. So I didn't want to talk the whole time. I wanted to talk for about 30 or 40 minutes, which I think I did. And I thought we could then now sort of do a Q&A, or if anybody also has any comments. I don't know if, Tony, you want to add anything I missed, or and then go into questions?
I'll just add that if you have a question, please ask it in the question section of your GoToWebinar navigation panel. We do have a couple questions that will be queued up. And Tony, did you want to mention anything?
Yeah, and as we're going out and talking about marijuana, in fact, as I'm sitting here, one of the things that I just got from folks who have kind of looked at this and polled some Ohioans, Kevin goes back to exactly the points that that folks really seem to take to. It's that big business model. According to the poll that was done, the things that people are really nervous about and don't like about legalization is the big business. It's edibles, and for Ohio, it's this whole monopoly piece, and that 10 people, which we then call a cartel, actually control the entire marijuana market. So that's why I think that Sam is, quite frankly, has been even ahead of its time, because our polling is showing exactly what Kevin has been saying for the last, I don't know how long we've been doing the big tobacco, probably 18 months to 2 years, and this really is the fear that people have. And we ask questions about brain development and all of these other businesses and all of these other things. You get back to The big business, you're going to have 1,100 stores in Ohio, which is 5 times as many Starbucks, 3 times as many liquor stores. You're going to have all of these marijuana products and these types of things. And this is really what seems to be playing. And again, I just literally got this email as we're sitting here with the webinar. So we're going to go on with some questions, but Kevin, I think that really does tie into what y'all are doing at the national and international level with the smart approaches to marijuana.
Thanks.
The next question we have is, what group should we follow on social media to be best informed of marijuana messaging?
Well, I would say that's a great question. It's a really good question, practical to the point. I like it. I would say follow the Drug Policy Alliance, follow the Marijuana Policy Project, follow an internet group called Marijuana Majority. I mean, this is fascinating. This is a group funded by, I believe, the Drug Policy Alliance, and also funded partially by the industry. And they are they also own, the same people own marijuana.com, and marijuana, I think it's also news.marijuana.com, which is funded by Weed Maps, which is another group I would look at. Weed Maps is an app, is the Yelp of marijuana, and they are one of the main funders of legalization in the industry today so they're all connected. But Marijuana Majority, it's an internet group that shows up in news articles. I've never seen them in person, but they show up on news articles all the time, and they're always quoted because all they do is social media on marijuana, and they want to show people that the majority of folks are in favor of pot. And so they've twisted, Bill O'Reilly is even on their website, and the reason he is because he has said things that I've said and many of you have probably said, which is, we don't want to throw people in jail for smoking a joint, etc. So they classify that as decriminalization, and they throw it on the website and say Bill O'Reilly is part of the Marijuana Majority. I mean, again, it's brilliant PR. It's all wrong, but it's brilliant at what they do. And so they're trying to make everyone think that, this is inevitable, and a majority of people agree with this. And so I would follow them, Drug Policy Alliance, Marijuana Policy Project, and then you can look and see who they're following, and also get a good sense of kind of what's going on. You're going to have to, but let me tell you something about social media, though. You're going to have to keep your wits about you and be very patient, because my rule when I do social media trainings with folks, and we're now starting to do those, is use social media to either collect information and learn new things. So, exactly the question, who do we follow? And that's very good. And also to get your own message out there. Never use it, I think, to respond to the opponents, because let me take it from me and the mistakes I've made and others have made. Because we're so passionate about this, and they say lies all the time, we want to respond for the record, right? We want to say, oh my God, no, like, that's wrong, people aren't in prison for pot, or no, what about, and when we do that, we get into these back and forth flame wars. We're never, and by the way, we're going to be outnumbered on social media 1,000 to 1. But that only matters if we're constantly interacting with them. We don't need to interact with them. We need to take their information, right, and then put our own information out there. Look at this study that found, whatever, like marijuana's triple. Look at this study finding that in Colorado they're not making the money they thought they were. Look at these, and then they're going to respond, of course, and say, well, you didn't look at this, or what about that, or what about? Don't respond. Don't ever respond. That is now, not everybody agrees with that, okay? But I feel like we got to use it to be on the offense. The last thing we need is another tool that brings us on the defense. And so you'll notice me on Twitter now. I've made it my resolution this year, and I think I've stuck to it mainly, that only in very extreme circumstances am I responding when I feel, once, maybe twice, and then stopping. But the vast majority of times, listen, I stop. I get our message out, and if I don't have anything to say that day, I don't tweet. We don't need to be constantly killing ourselves and just tweeting for nothing. But I retweet a lot more than I used to. I'm looking about what other friends of the field are saying. I think Scott Gagnon, who's our main SAM rep, who's done a lot of great work there, he is on Twitter. He has some great things. Margaret Farringer has some great things from Michigan. We have some others that are on our side. It's really important too to retweet and also see what they're saying.
And on that, what are there websites, are there social media sites? I know you mentioned Scott that we should definitely be following. Obviously, Sam is and Kevin Sabet should be others, but are there others that we, for our own messaging purposes, should be following?
Yeah, there's a great website we collaborate on called the Marijuana Report, and that's just the marijuanareport.org. It's National Families in Action and Sue Rushi, and then we partner with them along with TRI, which is Tom McClellan's former organization. And so I would look at the Marijuana Report for to learn about new news and things. I would go on our SAM website, learnaboutsam.org, and sign up for our alerts and our emails. We send a newsletter about once or twice a month. We send other action alerts. I mean, we'll often have weeks where we have to send 4 or 5 things because there's so much happening, and then we'll have weeks where we don't send anything. Like we haven't sent anything, I don't think, this week, or I don't even know if we sent anything last week. So it just kind of depends. And so those would be others that I would follow.
Well, and you have a section on your website. I think it's Big Marijuana Claims versus the Science. It has a lot of these more difficult sections.
Yes. Yeah, go on the website under issues, Big Marijuana Claims versus the Science. We have basically a they say, we say type thing where it kind of goes through a script.
Excellent. The next question, what messages can we post on social media to make new friends?
Well, I think the messages are, look at what some latest news or latest science and data are saying, and then post them. And also, the other thing, it's a good question about making new friends, is look around on social media about prominent people in your community who do not post about marijuana, but who do care about your community. Maybe it's the Boys and Girls Club. Maybe it's the, guy running for city council. Maybe, who knows who it would be, but look around and tweet to them. Let's say there's a study that comes out about marijuana and learning. Tweet to them. New study shows marijuana reduces IQ. What do you think? And then at whatever. I think things like that, of getting people in your community to talk about this, are really important.
Excellent. The next question is, how do we speak to teenagers about these issues? They're future voters and don't believe it's dangerous at all.
It's a great question. It's the million-dollar question, and they don't believe it's dangerous. We do. I should also just plug, I think Tony would allow me to do this. I'm going to plug our Speakers Bureau. We have a national Speakers Bureau where we also speak to young people, but we also speak to non-young people, I can say, on our website, learnaboutsam.org, under Speakers Bureau. And so these are the kinds of things, when I'm talking to young people, I often have to change my message a little bit. But you know what? It's not a big change, because let me tell you, teenagers care about wanting to know if they're being duped by somebody. And right now, they're being duped by the pot industry. And they're not all going to believe us. I mean, you're not going to be able to change the mind of a guy that's waking and baking every day and loves what he's doing. But you might be able to change the mind of that guy's brother or that guy's sister. You might be able to change the mind of the person who used to do that and is trying to figure out what they should do, if this is really the best thing for their future. And if you talk about how they're being duped by a massive industry selling these edibles and candies and other things that appeal to them, I promise you, you will have kids, as happens every single time I do this, either email me afterwards or sort of secretly come up to me after the presentation I give at a high school and say, that was the best presentation. I really appreciate you talking to us like adults, not talking down. You didn't say just say no. You didn't say, this is going to be the worst thing ever and make me a heroin addict. You didn't say that, my lungs are going to turn black if I smoke pot this week. But you did talk about the data and you talked about the industry, and that, I think, is really, really important. And the reason they don't believe it's dangerous is because they're going through the web, the World Wide Web, and they're reading these message boards and things on pot. They're seeing their friends use, and it's not a big deal. If you can sort of meet them where they're at there and say, yeah, I know you have friends that use. I know that, frankly, many of them may not even have problems with it, but your risk, what I tell kids is, their risk for a problem, however, goes up. And the question is, do they want to roll the dice in that respect, right? Do they want to risk their future? Because this is what the data says. Again, it doesn't say that every single person that's going to happen to them, but it's not a tiny minority. It's an appreciable number, and they need to realize that they're at risk.
Excellent. The next question we have is, how can employers maintain a drug-free workplace when employees claim to be legally using marijuana?
Well, obviously, it's very hard. I mean, what I think is that you need to, well, first of all, I mean, Tony probably should answer this, more experience, but at the end of the day, you're still allowed to have a drug-free workplace even if it's legal. And so I don't know about the new Responsible Ohio or any of the other provisions, what they say. I'm not sure exactly what they say on this specific subject, but I can tell you that thankfully, for example, Colorado Supreme Court ruled 2 weeks ago that it was okay for employers to still discriminate, and that's important because, again, you don't know if that person who had an accident was high or not, and so it's just hard to know that. And they sometimes say, well, I used it last week and it's still saying I'm positive, and that's not fair, and whatever. So, or they say I'm using it medicinally, and you better believe I'm testing positive. It's because I'm using it medicinally. Well, right now, employers can still say that they don't want to do that, but it's definitely an issue. I don't know, Tony?
Yeah, the Responsible Ohio language actually says that in section J4, if you ever want to quote it, is that folks who are using it recreationally, employers are protected. You don't have to allow use of it and those types of things. Except at the bottom of that section, there it says except. There's an except there. Except that a medical marijuana patient with a certification will be allowed to use in the workplace under the same guidelines as other prescribed medications. So what you have is basically, and I think it's the first time I've ever seen it, the first time that language has actually said that, you know what, we would allow marijuana use in the workplace. Now, on these other lawsuits, they've always gone on the side of the employers because the courts are saying that federal law supersedes state law, so that's how employers are winning. However, this is the first time that language has actually been used that people can use on the job. So again, it would be another place that we'd have to get some kind of court decision to see what exactly employers are allowed to do within their own workplace.
Good.
So also, and one other thing, as you're talking about this, Kevin, how do you feel about using these scare tactics and these scary stories in our presentations? As far, I know at the MAP Summit we talked a lot about the baby with the head being cut off by the woman on marijuana. Is that valuable to our cause, or is it something that really kind of hurts us?
Well, I think we got to be very careful with scare tactics because, again, the vast majority of people have not experienced this, and then they're going to think that if you're saying this, that basically everything else you're saying is a lie because they're not going to believe you. Now, what I'll say is that doesn't mean, though, that we would never talk about some story. So again, there's a difference between the scare tactics that are extreme and things like, this has not ever happened to everybody, but let me tell you about, what happened to Joshua. And there have been groups, and we're also trying to do this, that, kind of talk about some of these individual stories. And sometimes they're valuable because, the old saying goes, the death of 10,000 soldiers is a mere statistic, but the death of one is a complete tragedy, right? And so when you only talk stats, people just kind of say, well, okay, big deal. But when you say, look what happened to my neighbor, look what happened to my daughter, look what happened to my sister who was killed in a marijuana-related car accident the day after legalization passed. I care about this. Okay, people do listen to that, and so I think talking about some stories might be okay. But some of these more extreme examples, I think, will turn people off. So I think it's a very fine line. But I do think stories can be helpful if we do it the right way.
Excellent, thank you. The next question I might take is, what is the status of House Joint Resolution 4 in Ohio? How does passage affect how we educate without lobbying if and when House Joint Resolution 4 and legalization make it on the ballot? When you're talking, House Joint Resolution 4 has passed the House and the Senate and will be on the ballot here in Ohio in this November. What it is basically it's an initiative that would prohibit monopolies being put into Ohio's Constitution. The legislature has done this because of the monopolistic nature of the Responsible Ohio group, and quite frankly, they said they missed the boat when the casinos were here, when Penn Gaming, I guess, took over the casino industry. So it will be on the ballot. When I am asked this question, I don't talk a whole lot about House Joint Resolution 4 because then I get questions about antitrust law and constitutional law and all of this other kind of stuff. So I don't talk about it a whole lot. I do say that House Joint Resolution 4 was set up to protect Ohio's Constitution from a select few basically profiting off of Ohio's most sacred document. So that is as much as I go into it, and then I say, you know, that is another issue that kind of stands outside of the drug issue, the marijuana issue. Even though everybody kind of knows it's with it, it really doesn't mention, there's not one word about marijuana inside the initiative, and it talks more about constitutional law and those types of things. So I try to, and there will be a big push from the politicos to get this thing passed. So I think we try to stay on the side of marijuana, what we know, we're public health educators, and try to stay away from antitrust and monopoly or the constitutional law and all that other kind of stuff. Hope that answers the question.
Good.
The next question, I know we have about 7 minutes left. Is the loss of local control embedded in the Ohio legalization efforts? Is that a good message to utilize? In your local communities, what we have found is that folks who these things have been bought, these pieces of land, and a lot of times neighbors don't know that they've been bought, so or what they've been bought for. There have been some farmers that said, I didn't know I sold my farm to a bunch of marijuana industrialists, so they've been upset. This has kind of been a bait and switch type of thing. That's what we're hearing from farmers. I think absolutely that, you know, it's the old NIMBY principle. You know, they may like legalization, however, not in my backyard, which is what NIMBY stands for. So I think that is a good message. But again, I would go back to what our polling has been saying, is that the big business aspect, and you can tie that into the loss of local control. That, you know what, you're going to have a marijuana field. It's going to be, you know, in the language it says that you can't you can't zone these people out or anything else. So I think it is a good message as long as we tie it back to that big business effort and big businesses taking over even local control. Let's see. Okay, please mention the Fresh Start Act. Will this be on the ballot? The Fresh Start Act is a it is a voter. Responsible Ohio has initiated this again as well. And what they need to do, the Fresh Start Act is basically that it would expunge all records for those with marijuana offenses in the state of Ohio. So if you've ever been caught for marijuana, you know, busted for whatever, then you will basically get your record cleaned. Will this be on the ballot? They're starting to collect signatures. They're actually not starting to collect signatures. So that's the ballot board. I just saw this morning that the ballot board will will look at this. July.
Who's running that? Who's running that initiative?
Responsible Ohio.
So they want to run 2 initiatives?
Yes.
Huh.
And the way it's a little bit, and they want to do it for the 16 election. So they aren't going to get their signatures in by this year, but what they want to do, and what this has done is one of the big irritations. And in Ohio, what's interesting is a lot of legalizers have come to us here at Drug Free Action Alliance. How can we stop Responsible Ohio?
Right.
And a lot of it was because of this expungement issue. And so what they had to do was they've had to act fast in trying to put this on the ballot, and they will not have their signatures for this year because August 2nd will be the day that they have to have all their signatures in, and they haven't even started collecting them, nor have they gone through the ballot board. So this will not be on this year, but next year it will be something we have to look at. Is there anything about expungements when you're given that argument, Kevin, that you would want to add to this?
Listen, I'm in favor, depending on the situation, but in general, if it's a low-level nonviolent marijuana offense, I'm in favor of expungements if you served your time. And the other thing is I'm in favor of not having these criminal records for low-level use, which Ohio, I don't believe, has anyway. And I think talking about it like that makes a lot of sense because most people's desire for legalization doesn't come because they want marijuana cookies at the corner store or they want lollipops sold in a pot shop next to their church. It's because they don't want people to go to prison or have criminal records, especially marginalized communities. That's why they've hung on to this. And so I think anything we could do to close that gap to be as reasonable as possible, we should definitely do. And one of those things is that one of those issues is that we do need to reform, I think, the worst parts of our laws without, legalizing marijuana.
Excellent. And in Ohio, we are we can have 100 grams, which is 3.5 ounces, and it is still a minor misdemeanor with a maximum penalty of $150 fine with no jail time. So minor misdemeanors are expunged anyway. That's how we've been responding. Mm-hmm. So it really doesn't matter what you do for these low-level offenders. And do we want these higher level folks? We don't go into this, but we just say, well, it's already expunged, so this doesn't make any sense to us because of the minor misdemeanor.
Right.
I think the last question is, please repeat the 2 sources for updates besides learnaboutsam.org. So
the marijuanareport.org is a good place to go to for latest news. The marijuanareport.org. I'm trying to think and then my own website, kevinsabet.com, usually has latest news also regularly updated. We also have an app on the Apple Store which gets more or less regularly updated, which is about 99 cents. It goes to Fund Sam. And that gives you the latest news, latest talking points, all kinds of things straight to your smartphone.
Excellent. So, Dr. Sabet, thank you so much for joining us this day and helping us answer some of these questions. We just appreciate all that you do. We know that you're taking some bullets for all of us on some of these higher profile things. So we are extremely grateful for that and being the face of our side. Well, so thank you so much, and didn't know if you had any closing words.
No, thank you so much for having me, and it's a pleasure to be with you all. It's also a pleasure to have DFAA as an affiliate, and Tony, you as such a stalwart. By the way, also member of our Speakers Bureau, but also stalwart sort of searcher for the truth and for science, to do it in a smart way. I think it's just really important, and we are very concerned about what's going on in Ohio, and we want to be able to help as many people as we can. So just thank you so much for having me on. It was a real pleasure to be on with you all.
Thank you so much.
Okay, take care, everybody.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay, we will send the next webinar, the next advocacy webinar, will be the second Tuesday of August, which I actually do not have the date in front of me. I'm guessing it's around the 10th or the 11th. It is the August 11th, so that will be at 10 a.m. we'll come out. This has actually been recorded and put onto our member center. Will be put on our member center site hopefully later today. So if you have others in your coalition who would like to listen to it, you'll have 24-hour, 7-day-a-week access to this. So if you have any other questions or anything, please feel free to ask, and I'll get back to you. And thank you for all you do. I really do feel good about things. The latest polling is not undefeatable. I think we can absolutely win this in the state of Ohio. So keep doing your good work. Keep fighting the good fight, because I'm telling you, I really feel good about our side on this. And Responsible Ohio's basically been one of the worst run campaigns from a personal standpoint I've ever seen. So God bless you, and we will talk again soon. Thanks.